Good morning. I've never preached on this pulpit before, so this might be kind of different. I might need to do something else here. There. Good morning. Happy Memorial Day weekend. As we remember all of those who have fallen, who have given their life to our country, it's an honor to live in the United States. Can I get an amen? Amen. For 75 years, since the end of World War II, the United States has been active in keeping the world at peace. Have there been wars? Yeah, lots of wars. But the fact that commerce and free trade and the ability to sail anywhere in the world is due to the influence and the security that the United States has provided the world. Anybody have an iPad? Anybody have a cell phone that comes from China or Korea? I think they all come from China or Korea. The ability to get a ship is because of the United States military and making the concession after World War II that rather than becoming the dominant world power and possessing everything that the world has, we stepped back as a nation and said we will provide the peace and security for the world to allow for global trade. I don't know how much longer that's going to last, right? We've seen a lot of changes in the last 20 years. Changes are occurring rapidly. But here's the thing. Because we have had such global peace and security is the reason why when you go on Amazon, you can have what you need in 2 or 3 days. There is an endless supply chain, right? Now, I said that to say this. Today's sermon is about patience. Patience. At some point in our future, you will not get that iPhone when you want it. Matter of fact, there may be a year or two before that happens. You may not be able to go on Amazon and find whatever you need when you need it. If nothing else, the whole pandemic has shown us that supply chains are marginal, right? They're kind of iffy. And we're thankful that things kind of get back in place. But one of the things that it really showed us through the pandemic, when everything was hard to come by and we were locked in, it showed us how little patience we really have. Am I right? So when I talk about patience this morning, there is a reason why God included this when He, through the Holy Spirit, prompted James to say these words today. We're going to be looking at James chapter 5, and we're going to look at verses 7 through 11. Those are the luckiest passages in the Bible, 7 to 11. And as we read this, think about what patience does and what impatience does. Beginning in James chapter 5, verse 7, he says, be patient. You could just stop right there, right? The problem with that is just saying be patient doesn't work. You know what it does? It makes you more impatient, right? You tell a little kid to sit still, and you'll see him squirming like you've never seen him squirming. James says, be patient. He says, be patient, therefore. Now, therefore goes all the way back to last, so I'm going to have to repreach that again from last week. Last week, it talked about materialism. The last part of that chapter, Marcus didn't get into a lot, but it was about materialism and how materialism changes you from a person who is satisfied and secure with what they have to begin looking at things that you don't have and begin thinking, I need that. I'm going to make plans to get that. And a lot of times, our plans to get whatever it is that we think we need don't go through the proper channels. We're not going to God and asking for these things. We're doing them ourselves. And so people get into trouble with materialism. And James says, be patient, therefore, brothers. And that word brothers means family. Be patient, family, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient about it until it receives the early and the late rains. Then he says, you also be patient. Establish your hearts, for the coming of the Lord is at hand. Do not grumble against one another. Boy, are we going to talk about that. Do not grumble against one another, brothers, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. As an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider how those blessed who remained steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you have seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. Now, in that passage, you have patience, steadfastness, and Job. Those are not three good things that you want to fit together in a sermon. We're going to try to cover, there's a lot to cover in these verses. There's only 6 verses, and we're going to cover all of it. So be patient, right? We'll get to your favorite part of this passage very soon. And your favorite part is what? The part when it's over. That's my favorite part. When he's finished talking about patience, I'm happy. Because patience is difficult. It's hard. And here's the thing. I wish I could make a case that we are not impatient. But I can't. Because we are probably the most impatient people in recorded history. Would you agree with that? I mean, you think back in time, and you go back 50 years, we are way more impatient than people were 50 years ago. They knew how to wait. We don't know how to wait. Now, I wrote a few things down to just, if you're not sure if you're impatient, right? You might be impatient. If you've ever sat at a red light and honked your horn at the person in front of you before the light turned green, you might be impatient. If you've ever been stuck behind farm equipment on a narrow 2-lane road, like on Grant Line, and used the shoulder to pass on the right side, and also used the field, some of you have been there. If you've ever cut the sleeves off your Western shirt while you were still at the store, you might be impatient, and you might be a redneck. I just thought I'd throw that one in there. This is my favorite. If you count items in the shopping cart in the grocery store, if you count the items in other people's carts ahead of you, and then you use that information to figure out which line you should get in, you might be impatient. Now, here's the thing. If you keep track of the person that you were going to get behind, and you watch where they were when you check out to make sure you got ahead of them, you might be impatient. If you have an app on your iPhone to speed up your order at Taco Bell, if you've ever used the phrase, I'll just get it myself, at the pharmacy, you'll get that on the way home. If you've ever burned the roof of your mouth on a piece of pizza, twice on the same piece, you might be impatient. And the last one is, if you're saying to yourself, when is this stupid list going to be over? We know. Impatience is a pandemic, and we are all infected with it. Psychologists have a name for this. They actually call it hurry sickness, and we all have it. Here's what hurry sickness may look like. You rush through tasks. You just rush. You know, you're in a hurry in everything you do. You feel irritable when there's a delay. Anybody ever feel irritable when there's a delay? What about the freeway? You interrupt or talk over people. I just threw this one in there. If you finish your husband's sentences, you might be impatient. Or it's just that you and your wife are on the same wavelength. That's what Sandy tells me. If you run through your to-do list in your head during the day, you might have a problem. That's what hurry sickness is defined as. If you treat everything like a race or a contest, you have a symptom of hurry sickness. If you always feel like you're behind schedule, if you're continually multitasking, and here's an example. If you can watch the Giants baseball game on TV while you're working on a puzzle on your iPad and listening to an audio book, then I don't know anybody, by the way, that does that. If you always have a sense of urgency, I've probably told this story before, in 17 or 18 years, but one of the things that comes to mind when I think of this idea is that years ago we had our grandkids over last night. We'll have them again tonight, and if I survive, we'll take them home on Monday. But I remember a time when my twins, they were little toddlers, and Sandy had gone somewhere that evening just to escape, and I was with the kids, and one of my tasks was I had to get them in the bath. It was probably a Saturday night, and get them ready, so I get them in the bath, and getting two little kids in the bath at the same time, when one's hopping out and one's hopping in, and they're back and forth, and it was tough. And I finally got them all finished, and we're getting out, and they used to do this thing called the naked dance. Does anybody do that still to this day? Okay. They do this naked, they'd run off through the house, right? And I've got a towel, and I'm chasing them down, and I'm trying to get them dried off. And I remember getting angry in the bathroom because they wouldn't calm down so I could. And I said, come on, we got to get done. And Jessie looks at me and she goes, why? And it just hit me. Why? Hurry disease. Hurry disease. We rush through some of the best experiences in our life because we're caught up in this idea that we've got to hurry through everything. You look back on some of those things, and they were the most wonderful things that you've ever experienced. And you'll kick yourself for having hurried through them. Psychologists also tell us that hurry sickness leads to a sense of urgency, and it leads to anxiety. You know what the number one health issue today in the United States is? Anxiety and the depression and things that follow from anxiety. The overwhelming anxiety and stress that we feel is often caused by taking on too much. Just say no is a really good, helpful trick to learn. I have always been a people pleaser, except for my wife. No, I sometimes. But I've always had this thing where I don't tell people no. At work, at things going on, just, could you do this? Sure, I'll do that. I've got 10 other things I'm going to do that day, but sure, I'll help with that. Being able to say no is really important. Otherwise, you're going to end up mentally and physically spent, and you won't be any help for anybody. And what you notice is that this hurry disease has some health symptoms as well. Fatigue is one of them. If you feel fatigued, common headaches, often having headaches is a symptom of anxiety and hurry disease. Low immune system. Do you always get sick? It could be a problem with that. The whole topic is an interesting topic. And this whole idea of a lack of patience. So one of the things that I read this week is that sociologists will tell you that impatience and procrastination are very interconnected. Have you ever thought about that? If you're impatient, it's highly likely that you're also a procrastinator. And I can tell you that from being the president of the Procrastinators Club, you tend to put everything off. There was a study, I read this, a study done in 2010 where a large group of people were offered a sum of money. We're going to give you a check this week for this amount. And then if you want to take that check, you can. But if you wait till next week, we're going to give you twice as much in that check. And the group that took the money the first week, in other words, give me the money today, were called what? Impatient. The impatient people took the money today. Even though they waited a week, they could get twice as much. They took the money today. What's interesting about the study is that the people who took the check today, on average, didn't cash the check for 9 to 10 days. Because sometimes if you're impatient, you're also a procrastinator. Now, think about that. There are people that say, I don't want to wait on you. I want what I want right now. But I will make you wait on me forever until the last minute, right? I already don't like this sermon. When James says, be patient, maybe he's onto something. Can you imagine the difference between our impatience and the impatience at the day of James? At the time period when James wrote this, was probably some of the most laid-back people in the world, you know, in an agricultural environment. They knew how to be patient. So it's not surprising in verse 7 when James says, be patient, therefore, family, until the coming of the Lord. And then he gives us an example. He says, see how the farmer waits. And if you could just stop right there. See how the farmer waits. He's an example to someone who has patience. He waits for the precious fruit of the earth. Whatever crop it is that he's waiting for, he has to wait for that. And he has to be patient about it until he receives what James calls the early and the late rains. Now, in that culture, in that environment, in that time period, in that climate, in that geography, they had early rains and late rains. The early rains you had to wait for because you didn't have a tractor. You didn't have sophisticated equipment to break the ground up, to furrow, and to get the ground ready to plant. You had to wait until the early rains, and then that softened the earth. And you could go out there and you could plant your crop. And then you had to wait after you planted because they didn't have irrigation systems. And they didn't have things to get water on. And so they would have to wait until the late rains. And so here you've got that crop in the ground and you're waiting for the weather. And you have to wait until the late rains come to nourish the ground, to be able to grow that crop, and then you pull it out of the ground. And crops don't benefit from an impatient farmer, right? Farmers don't benefit from being impatient. There are early rains, so be prepared when that rain hits early to get out there and till the ground and get it planted. You have to do that when it rains. You can't do it early or you're not going to have a good crop. And then there are late rains. Don't pull your harvest before the late rains or you're going to miss out on a big harvest. You need that late rain to be able to grow that fruit to its maximum growth. So there's early rains and there's late rains. Now, you can take that concept and you can apply it to your life as an example. There are a lot of things that we want to do in life, right? A lot of things we want to accomplish, a lot of goals that we have, and those are all really good things to do. To plan out your days, to plan out your weeks, to have goals and things that you set as things you want to accomplish. But you also have to be patient enough to know that you're not going to accomplish them without the timing of God. Now, here's an example, and I'll just throw this one example out there. If you've got little kids in your house that you're raising, that is not a good time to invest yourself in your job so much that you're never home. There will be time to do that. But the goals and the things you want to accomplish may have to be put off until a later time period. That's wisdom, right? I can say that now that I'm old, right? James says, like the farmer who knows the seasons, there are seasons in your life, there are seasons in my life. There are seasons that we can do things and be in our optimal performance. And there are times when you won't be at optimum. The girls this morning wanted to have a race with me. Okay? Why are you snickering? I can still beat 3-year-old kids. What I found is I had to hold them back, right? I had to hold them back so I could get to the finish line ahead of them. And they said I was cheating. Papa, don't cheat. I said, that's not cheating. That's competing wisely. Be patient, right? Your time will come. Be patient. It's good advice. But now James gets personal, right? All that's good advice. Just wait till the time is right. Wait on God. Pray for these things. Allow God to fulfill them in your life. Be patient. Then James says, how is this impatience manifesting in your own life? Do you have an agenda for things you want to accomplish that makes you not care so much about how you treat the people around you? And sometimes that happens. Am I right? You say things like, my time is more valuable than your time. And you even say things like, I don't have time for this. You ever been stuck behind a light and you're late for you left 10 minutes late to get to the meeting that you're supposed to be there at, a certain time, and then you hit every light along the way, and you're upset. You're saying, I don't have time for this. Why don't you have time for that? Because I didn't leave on time, because I didn't, right? I don't have time for this. Or I don't have time for you. Now, let me ask you this. Everybody has a phone that typically gives the name of the person on your phone as it's ringing. Am I right? Anybody not have a phone like that? Have you ever looked at who's calling and said, oh, I don't have time for this? Hopefully it's not my picture on there when you call, but there are sometimes we just don't have time for people. Impatience does that to us. So when James says in verse 9, do not grumble against one another, brothers. Do not grumble against each other, family, so that you may not be judged. Behold, the judge is standing at the door. Now, I don't know about you, but that line there, the judge is standing, that scares me a little bit, right? Why is the judge standing at the door? Because he's about to bring judgment. He's up and ready. He's ready to judge us. James is going to talk about two different types of patience, and we're going to hit both of them, so be patient. We're going to talk about patience with each other, which is one kind of patience, horizontal patience, if you will. And then we're going to talk about patience with God, vertical patience. Both kinds of patience are required as a Christian. And let me just say they're required, not suggested. Both have consequences because God will judge both of those kinds of impatience. God will judge us for being impatient with one another. And God will judge us for being impatient with God. There's actually two different Greek words, if you look at this passage, that are used for patience. If you have a King James version, it'll use the English word patience in both cases, but they're two different words. The first word that he uses is patience, right? It's translated patience. But if you go all the way down to verse 7 and 8, where he says, be patient in the King James, he's talking about being patient with others on the top part. But the second part, he's talking about being steadfast. Maybe if you have an NIV or ESV or, New American Standard, it'll say steadfast. Or it might say something that's steadfast along those lines. James says there are two kinds of patience. There's a kind of patience that he's talking about being patient with others. And then there's another kind of patience where you have to remain steadfast. You have to be solid. You have to continue on with that. We're going to look at both of those kinds. Being patient with others. He says, don't grumble against each other. Be patient. The Greek word there is macrothomio, which is macro, right? Big, large. Thymio is literally means slow to anger. So you've got a really large slow to anger. That's patience. If you got a really short slow to anger, is that mini thymio? I don't know. But it's a lot better to call yourself mini thymio than it is, impatient. The Greek word means slow to anger. In other words, you put up with a lot and you don't revenge yourself on other people. Now, is it okay to put up with a lot if you have an eye roll going? Because that's my version of patience, right? I'm really patient, but I'm rolling my eyes at something. You don't revenge yourself. That's what that patience means. If you get further down to 10, 11, again, an example of suffering and patience. There are those who remain steadfast in verse 11. That's a different kind of. Now, the NIV uses perseverance for that, and that's a good word to describe that Greek word. It's a word that really means to fix yourself, to stand firm, to not budge, to obey immovably. No matter how hard life gets, no matter how messed up and how senseless the circumstances that you find yourself in, stand firm. Stand firm. You could use the word establish yourself, because that's what James says. James says, establish yourself in this. When God established, same word, the covenants, how long did they last? Every covenant he established is still in place, right? God has established these things. James says, establish yourself in this perseverance. And that has mostly to deal with our patience with God. So two kinds, impatience with others, impatience with God. Impatience with God and the way he orders your life and the way your life is going. So the first one is impatience with people. And this one is frightening to me. It's frightening. Again, it's very convincing. He could have said, don't be impatient with people when they mistreat you. Don't be impatient with people when they're irritable towards you, and so on, right? We can all think of situations where someone just kind of, said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing, and you get impatient with them. In other words, he could have said, don't revenge yourself when these bad people do bad things to you. Don't punch them out. Don't harm them. That would be easier for us to say, right? Because we'd all say, well, I don't think I do that. Does anybody punch anybody else out when you get impatient? Hopefully not. I can say, I've never done that. A lot of us would say, because I've never punched anybody out, I have self-control. That's not what James says. James says, have self-control. The way he says it is, don't grumble. Now, after studying this for several weeks, and I've been in this passage before in different sermons, I hate that word, grumble, because it is so convicting to me, because I've always been a grumbler. I've always been a grumbler. Some of you are grumblers. Grumbling is not just complaining. There's a whole list from this word. Grumbling is scorning. It's making fun of people. I love to do that. Grumbling is zinging people, right? You ever just dig in and get somebody back? Grumbling is griping. It's complaining. Your iced tea ever not show up on time? Just mentioning is grumbling. Grumbling is griping, complaining. It's finding fault with little things. Grumbling is nitpicking. Grumbling is complaining all the time. And a lot of grumbling is under your breath. But it's just a matter of time before under your breath comes out loud and clear. I think it would be good if we just have a mass confession this morning Everybody that's a grumbler, raise your hand. I'll hold mine really high, right? Okay. The ones who didn't raise their hand, everybody who's a liar. Right? No, it's just, all right. We all grumble. We all grumble from time to time. Here's what James is saying. He's not saying, be perfect. Don't ever grumble. He's saying, be careful, because grumbling can become a way of life. It can become so ingrained and locked into us that even in happy times we're grumbling. You know? Man, that was the best movie I've ever seen in my life. Oh yeah, but it could have been better. Right? It could have been better. They could have used so-and-so for that part. Grumbling is taking advantage of opportunities to really excel as a human being by being patient with people, being kind with people, but instead we find whatever negative we can possibly find. It's living in a negative kind of lifestyle. Grumbling's under your breath, doesn't matter, it's still grumbling. And boy howdy, can I use that word? That's actually 2 words. That hits home with a lot of us. It hurts. It's very convicting to me because I do a lot of grumbling. I mostly grumble when I drive. Does anybody do that? I grumble when I drive. I grumble when Sandy drives. That's how I know I grumble. Grumbling, I would love to say grumbling's not so bad. If you look at grumbling compared to other things, grumbling's not that bad. But notice it doesn't say murder, theft. Think of some really bad things that you could do, right? Beating somebody up, stealing a bunch of money. He doesn't list those and say the judge is at the door. When's the judge at the door? When we grumble. When we grumble. If you grumble, you will be condemned for grumbling, and you will be judged by the judge of the universe for grumbling. And I think the thing that James is teaching here is that, in a sense, the big spiritual battles that we face in life, right? The big dramatic historic spotlights, when the moments when we really shine, we really did something wonderful because it's a big opportunity to do something great, and we step in and we are the person we need to be. The big spiritual battles for your soul, for the person that God wants you to be, the thing that's going to determine who you are becoming and who you will be in 1 billion years from now. And by the way, everybody in this room will be alive 1 billion years from now. We are created eternal beings. Those big spotlight kind of moments don't determine who you are. It's the day-to-day things. It's the little battles, right? It's the things that you determine to do will determine the kind of person that you are. Not in the big dramatic battles and events of life, the spotlight times. Unfortunately for us, it has more to do with the little small choices that come from the attitudes that we possess every day. Moment by moment, in the mundane corners of your life, we are making decisions that determine the person that we are. Not the person that we want to be, but the person you are today and the person who you will become. That's the reason why, if you think about, sin as lying and robbery and forgery and murder and that kind of thing, you can feel pretty good about yourself, right? You read this and it says, be patient. Well, I may not be patient, but I'm not a murderer. I'm not a murderer. I'm not a liar. Maybe I am a liar, right? James says, be careful. He's talking about patience. He's warning us against impatience and pettiness and jealousy that comes from that. He's talking about forgetting God, being impatient. He's talking about attitudes that really have to do with the way that you will be every day, moment by moment, every minute of your life. To put it another way, what James is teaching us is that, I heard a preacher say it this way one time, that heaven and hell are behind every bush. There's not some one big choice, right, on who you're becoming. And I'm talking about as a child of God, right, we've been saved through faith in Jesus Christ. We know where we're going. We're going to be with Christ one day. And in the meantime, we are living this life of spiritual development whereby we are becoming more and more like Christ every day, except for the impatient ones, except for the ones that choose to live in a way that is not advancing us to become more like Christ. You can sabotage your spiritual development without even thinking about it in the day-to-day choices that we make. So heaven and hell, the way we live like we're going to heaven or the way we want to live like we're going to hell, is made in those daily choices, attitudes that we have. Living the way of heaven is basically my life for your life, right? That's the choice you make. If I'm going to live like I'm going to heaven, then my life is for your life. I'm here to serve you. If I'm living the way of hell, it's your life for mine. Let me just say the way that works. The way of heaven is the way of Christ. My life for yours. I'm going to serve you. I'm going to look out for you. I'm going to be kind to you. I'm going to make sure that everything that I'm doing is for your benefit and promoting you. The way of hell is your life for mine. I'm only going to work for you. I'm only going to work with you if it profits me. And I'm going to use you to get what I need. If you compliment me all the time, I'm going to be your friend and I'm going to hang out with you because I'm getting what I need from you, right? And if you evaluate your relationships, very often you'll find that the connection that you have to people is very often because you're getting something from them. The way of heaven, as a result, means that a lifestyle of courtesy and kindness and thoughtfulness and generosity in everyday life. Every time something jumps out from behind a bush, you're kind, you're thoughtful, you're generous to people. The way of hell is pettiness and jealousy and self-pity and harshness. Now, if Satan has a choice in your life to try to push you into one of these directions, which one do you think he's pushing you in? Without you even knowing it, he's moving you into pettiness and jealousy and self-pity and harshness. It's the way of the world. It's the way that Satan has devised it. Now, quick question. Men, does your wife know when you're grumbling at other people? Would you allow her just to say something like, your choice, and just remind you that I notice you're grumbling, and you have the opportunity to choose a better way to go? Would you allow your wife to do that? No way. But it'd be helpful, wouldn't it? The problem is, well, I'm not even going to go with the problem. You know what the problem is. If you were given the opportunity as a man to tell your wife when she's grumbling, there'd be no end to it, right? It becomes a contest. I found you grumbling 20 times yesterday, but you only found me grumbling 15. Grumbling, being impatient with one another, is a very critical flaw. That's impatience with other people. Impatience with God, it's one thing to be grumbling against other people who are driving around you in crazy, erratic ways, people who don't serve you the way you think they should, people that say ugly things, it's easy. But to grumble against God is kind of a different thing, isn't it? And just in the similar way that grumbling against other people can become a lifestyle, it can become an attitude, a choice that we make, that we fall into and not even know we're in it, grumbling at God can be the same. Has God taken a different path in your life than you anticipated? If he hasn't, you're not paying attention. Because all of us, have this path that we think we want to take, and then life throws us a turn. And God is in control of those events in our life. I don't think there's anything that you would call a coincidence in people's lives. God is ultimately in charge. Yes, we have free will, we can make choices, and some of us make some really stupid choices, and we get into some really bad trouble, and then we want God to bail us out. And God says, no, there's a lesson in there for you. You need to learn, and then we'll move on. Now, the problem is we can grumble against God in all kinds of ways, right? We have a tendency to grumble about things. If you grumble about people, you're grumbling against one another. If you're grumbling about things that happen, events, you're grumbling about God. You're grumbling against him. You ever had a flat tire? Grumble, right? You ever have a vacation and it rains the whole time? Who are you grumbling against? We've already talked about red lights, right? There's one other story, one more illustration, and I know we're kind of running out of time here. He says in verse 10 and 11, he uses the second word for patience. He says, as an example of suffering and patience, brothers, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. Behold, we consider those blessed who remain steadfast. You have heard of the steadfastness of Job, and you've seen the purpose of the Lord, how the Lord is compassionate and merciful. There's actually a lot to say here, but I'm going to try to give you the short version. When he talks about the prophets, he says, look at the prophets. There is so much to process within that. God comes to Isaiah, talking about the prophets. 3 come to mind: Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Hosea, right? You can look those up when you get home. You know all about them. You see this in Isaiah 6. He comes to Isaiah. He says, I'm going to send you to preach the gospel to a group of people over the next 20 to 30 years, and no one will ever believe you. Have at it, right? He says, I'm going to send you to people that will never hear you, they'll never see you, they'll never understand, they're never, ever going to get it. So get going. How would you feel about that? There would be a tendency for me to grumble, right? God, why'd you give me this idea? He comes to Jeremiah. God comes to Jeremiah. Jeremiah preaches at the same time as Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians are coming against Israel. And God says to Jeremiah, here's what I want you to tell the Israelites. I want you to tell them that right now, this event is my will for their country. That Nebuchadnezzar is my tool that I'm going to use for my instrument of chastening of the nation. And so you're going to lose in battle. You're going to lose this war. You're going to surrender to Nebuchadnezzar. Go obey Nebuchadnezzar. How'd that go over? Of course, Israel doesn't want to do that, and so they don't. And they resist. And of course, when they're destroyed, they're taken into exile. And when they get into exile, they say, well, God will deliver us because we're not going to settle in Babylon. And then God comes to Jeremiah and he says, tell the exiles that they have to submit, that they need to get involved in the city, that they need to live in that pagan city and embrace the city, and they have to work for the peace of the city and pray for the peace of the city, et cetera, et cetera. He says, you need to be involved. I want you to be in every facet of that pagan life and flourish. Jeremiah says, that's what I'm going to do for the next 20 years? Everybody's going to think I'm a traitor. And they did. And the Lord's will is for you to surrender to a pagan king. Give in, give up, accept the exile. He says, they're going to think I'm a traitor. And they did. And there's one place where all of his friends in his hometown, this is in Jeremiah 11, they decide to get together and they say, we have to kill Jeremiah. This man is preaching treason. But God told him to do it. And in the end, Jeremiah had a horrible life. But the Bible said Jeremiah was steadfast. Steadfast. Even though his life didn't go the way he thought it would go, Jeremiah, you're going to be a prophet. Ooh, all right. No. The last one I've got is Hosea. God comes to Hosea, and he says, Hosea, you're a prophet, but you're never going to be any kind of a good prophet until you understand what my life is like as God. Therefore, I want you to marry a woman who's never going to be faithful to you. Her name's Gomer. I want you to marry her, but she's going to continually be unfaithful to you. She's going to commit adultery several different times. You're going to have to go forgive her and bring her back over and over again. That's how your life's going to go. Because you're never going to understand your life until you understand what my life is like with my people Israel. You're never going to be any good as a prophet unless you have a life of suffering like that. So go find Gomer and get married. And Hosea says, okay, get going, Hosea. How many of us would want a life like that? Get going, Jeremiah. Get going, Isaiah. And their lives were a mess, and nothing was ever right for them. And God says, I want you to obey me. I want you to be steadfast. I want you to stand firm. I want you to obey. Now, why does James give us that example of the prophets? Because compared to that, my life's a cakewalk.